Hello, my name is Paul, and I am proud to be a science nerd. I studied physics in college and graduate school, and later on, I worked as an astrophysicist at NASA. Now I teach astronomy and physics to college students. I'll be taking you on a journey to explore the connections between science and faith. Thank you for joining me. For a number of years, I was a working scientist. I studied and I wrote papers about tiny up-close things like atomic nuclei and about enormous, distant things like quasars. I loved the process of doing controlled experiments, making careful observations, and working with data to draw conclusions. But after a while, I began to wonder about what I was doing. To be honest, I began to wonder about modern science. I wanted to know who invented it and where it came from. And I was surprised to find out that it all started with a church guy. Nicholas Copernicus lived in 16th century Poland. He was a church administrator, but he was also an outstanding mathematician and an expert in the astronomy of his day. Now, Copernicus was taught that the Earth sits still at the center of the cosmos, while the moon and the sun and the planets and the stars all move around it. But after reading the work of ancient Greek astronomers and making some observations of his own, Copernicus suggested a radical rearrangement of the whole cosmos. He placed the sun in the center and put the Earth up in an orbit between Venus and Mars. Now, I cannot overstate how radical this theory was. People freaked out. Copernicus was suggesting that the ground we walk on was no longer stable, but hurtling through space, up and down. Once thought to be absolute became relative. Everything was up in the air. Literally. People even started questioning religious truths. I mean, if the Earth isn't the center of the universe, how can we be sure of anything? So, as you might guess, some people were unhappy with Copernicus's ideas, especially philosophy professors. They were the scientists of his day. Religious leaders were also upset. Philosophers challenged him. If the Earth is moving, why isn't there a constant wind blowing birds out of the sky? Why do we not fly off the Earth? Why does a drop ball land just below its point of release? And why do the stars not change position in the sky? Yeah, you could say that they were skeptical of old Copernicus. Then there were his religious opponents, theologians, pastors, bishops, even the Pope. The Bible, they argued, said the Earth does not move. The world is firmly established, it shall never be moved. That's 1 Chronicles 16:30. And in the Psalms, it says, you set the earth on its foundations so that it shall never be shaken. And there are many more verses where those came from. The claims of Copernicus were not published until he lay on his deathbed, so he never had a chance to hear from his critics. But other astronomers came after him to defend his theory. The most famous of these is certainly Galileo, who is rightfully called the father of modern science. With his telescope, he forcefully promoted the sun-centered cosmos. Galileo never could quite prove Copernicus's theory, but he totally demolished the old Earth-centered idea. On the religious side, Galileo argued that all truth is God's truth. Therefore, the truth of science cannot contradict the truth of Scripture. The Bible, Galileo claimed, is not a science book. One of his most famous quotes is this: "The Bible shows how one goes to heaven, not how the heavens go." But Galileo's boldness got him into trouble with the church, who still felt like a sun-centered view contradicted Scripture. In the same era, two other Christian scientists, Johannes Kepler and Isaac Newton, played major roles in the scientific revolution. Like Copernicus and Galileo, they believed that scientific knowledge does not undermine the Christian faith, but actually illuminates it. They believe science makes faith larger. In fact, Kepler argued that it is our Christian duty to explore all of God's creation, which is exactly what science does. For Kepler, doing scientific research was a devotional exercise. It drew him closer to God and to nature. Since Copernicus and Galileo and Kepler and Newton, science has greatly expanded its reach. The revolution exploded in biology through the work of Charles Darwin and in psychology through the work of Sigmund Freud. In the 20th century, Einstein's theory of relativity unveiled startling new relations between time and space and gravity. Quantum mechanics taught us that uncertainty is everywhere. Today, genetics is a mature science, and neuroscience is on its way to becoming one. These disciplines are driving new questions about what it means to be human. And biotechnology and genetic editing challenge us with ethical questions we are only beginning to ask. Today, we accept Copernicus's theory, no problem. But some Christians have difficulty with more recent scientific advances. Can you guess one? That's right, evolution. It is rejected by a lot of American Christians. Now, the evidence in favor of evolution is overwhelming and is agreed on by virtually every scientist. For them, denial of Darwin's theory is not an option. But for some Christians, it seems to contradict the book of Genesis, so they reject it. Now, we can learn from Copernicus and Galileo and Kepler and Newton about why science should be celebrated as an expression of our God-given capacity to know and to understand. Galileo wrote, "I do not feel obliged to believe that the same God who has endowed us with senses and reason and intellect has intended us to forego their use." Kepler went further and insisted that science was a gateway to truth and faith. But now it's up to us, to our generation. It's up to us to embrace science, to celebrate its discoveries, and to welcome its challenges. Together, let's continue to explore how science can illuminate and expand our faith.